Bonnie was one of those whalers at the time that sort of he was there, and to a large extent is remembered largely for his rambunctiousness, if you want to call it that, right? Because he was. Yeah, and we're gonna get into that a little later as we get into the program. But Bonnie Wailer, that the first song he played, "Dreamland," is actually a remake of what this group El Tiempo's "My Dream Island."
Yes.
And several people have done that song, but today we're focusing on Bonnie Wailer. And he actually revisited this song later on in his career, and brought the tempo up a little bit more.
It was one of his go-to songs when
Right.
he's doing his live performances. The reason why I played those two songs, Richie, is even though that was the Wailers then, is that Bonnie was singing lead on those songs at the time, in Bob's absence.
And again, some significant aspects of his career that we really want to focus on. But for the listeners out there, and I just want to use the opportunity to welcome you all again to Sunday Scoops. Most people may not know that Bonnie actually knew Bob long before they came into the singing business. In fact, they grew up together out there in 9 Miles. Bonnie Wailer was born in Kingston, but his father is a man from St. Ann. And so they grew up very close to each other, and so spent over time that in that formative early years up to the preteen years, they spent a lot of time together, and so out of that from early, they both decided that they wanted to be in the music business, and actually journeyed into Kingston together, right, to seek life as recording artists, however you want to put it, because that was the early 1960s. And the second song you played, Pass It On, in 1962, when Bonnie had decided that he wanted to become a recording artist, he had made arrangements with the Kong, Leslie Kong, and the Kong brothers, essentially, early Beverly's, to go to the studio to record that song. And according to Dog newspaper, he left school late the evening, and when he came to the studio, it was too late. And so he would have recorded, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Judy Maud assisted with a rewrite of this song to a certain degree. But this is early Bonnie Wailer. Ultimately, Bob had actually gone on, did some recording. Both had their own difficulties getting into the Kong studio. And Bob eventually got in. Bob, from what I was told, wasn't particularly willing to go and face the studio man and get turned on. But ultimately, Bob went, recorded. Bonnie decided to just work with the group after they formed themselves together, and they came under Joe Higgs' tutelage in that early 1960s period, where Joe Higgs and a lot of people have it out there that Joe Higgs was just grooming the Wailers, if you will. But Higgs was part of a group, part of a team, if you will, within that Western Kingston belt, who was working with a number of up-and-coming artists. And it just so happened that these youngsters were part of that group. Ultimately, they call themselves the Teenagers, right. Which was Bob, Bonnie, Peter Tosh, who had journeyed himself out of Westmoreland and came into Kingston, always toting his guitar. And then you had Beverly Kelso and Cherry Smith. They call themselves the Teenagers. By the time they got introduced into Studio One, they were going by the moniker the Wailing Wailers. And of course, we know Coxsone decided to change that, and they subsequently called themselves the Wailers. But so this is the point at which now he would have started to cement himself. And to your point, God, these were some of the two songs you played earlier were some of the the few songs that he actually led on, because while he wrote a lot of songs for the group too, he did not participate as a lead singer, which was kind of curious, because they all would lead at different points in time. You were saying.
Then they had that guy
Dreamwalker, Constantine Walker.
And he talked about that too, with Visions. We call him Visions.
Right.
He says Dreamwalker, we call him Visions. And even one of Bob Andy's big song, I Want to Come Back Home, he and Visions did backup on that song. So he did a lot of studio session work too, apart from working with the Wailers. He wrote a couple of songs for them, songs like I Stand Predominate.
Predominant. Where you get that from?
Well, if you listen to the lyrics of the song, brethren, them sing it, I stand predominate. So I go and tell you, say, that is what the song, that's what the man singing of the song.
I mean, I'll fight about that part, because, right now your lyrics stand predominant.
Yes, even though the record label says I stand predominant, the lyrics of the song says I stand predominate.
Right. So, wait, let's give the listeners a taste, a couple of those. Who feels it, knows it. I stand predominate.
And Sunday Morning, which was a big hit for Gregory Isaacs when he did Sunday Morning too. Hallelujah Time, that was in 1973. Before that, you heard Who Feels It Knows It, I Stand Predominate, Sunday Morning, This Train.
Listen, you played those, what was it, 5 songs.
Yep.
And, if you are a lover of Jamaican music, you're a lover of Wailers music, these are 5 songs that you must have in your catalog, because these are songs that, as far as I'm concerned, as a man who, fool on the history of the music, these songs are defining songs in the career of the Wailers and of these artists as they moved eventually into their own solo careers. We made a comment earlier that Bunny never really did a lot of lead on Wailer's songs. And, within the group too, that sort of was always a simmering issue. My sense is that, the ultimate breakup of the group, some of that played a part.
Especially for someone who wrote so much.
He wrote a lot of songs. And there was a sense of, while the group in that early stage were alternating leads, Bob led on a particular song, sometimes all 3 of them would come in and do pieces of the same song. But over time, Bunny seemed to have been, for want of a better word, squeezed into the recesses, the back, into the background. And so you started to hear from him less and less as a solo voice on the Wailers, Wailers output. But the group nonetheless found a groove. By the 1970s, they were now being looked at by Chris Blackwell. Of course, Bob had already done some work with the Kong Brothers in terms of his own solo recording, and Blackwell released some of those songs on his Island record label in that early 1960s period. Beverly's also released work, but eventually the Wailers would leave Studio One and decided to Bob actually left the business for a little bit, went to after they left Studio One, they established Wailer and Soul, the record label. And I guess nothing was going on. Bob decided to go to America, so he can earn some money. help finance the maintenance of the label. And it was during that time that your guy, what you call him? Constantine,
Dreamwalker. Bunny Wailer called him Visions.
Right. But him never, that was, and during that time too, Bunny would now step up to the microphone and do some lead work. A couple other songs that I love put out there too.
Light Up.
Yes, Brainwashing, Riding High, and so on. I think we should give because this form part of the Bunny Wailer catalog.
Yes,
and
it's early Bunny Wailer, but it's still part of his story.
Absolutely. So let's give a listen.
Yeah, that was Riding High, and before that was Brainwashing, part of the Wailers. Early Wailers, and Bunny Wailer taking lead on those songs too.
Yeah, I think in that early 60s iteration of the Wailers, they were, because Coxsone would come and provide them with a lot of 45s from R&B singers from overseas, and tell them, listen to them tune here, and out of which the influence came, because most of that music you were playing there they're classified basically as blues of the late 1960s, early 1960s blues coming out of Jamaica. So, and a lot of the Wailers' work at the time were more blues, one or two little pieces of R&B, which ultimately you saw that definition when you move from R&B into ska and back again. But that was what the group was doing. But at the time, though, the Wailers, locally as a bunch of youngsters, was perhaps one of the hottest group. Well, not perhaps, they were. And in another show, we will show you how other people basically knocked them off of them records as well.
And their main influences at the time was people like Louis Armstrong, Little Richard, the Drifters,
Curtis Mayfield in particular.
Yes.
They sample a lot of Curtis Mayfield work. A lot of this, the Hallelujah Time, the songs like those. A lot of those were, you hear the Curtis Mayfield in those songs as they came up. But the fact is, an integral part of the Jamaican music catalog, if you will, especially that early period as the music is now attempting to find its footing, and I can appreciate the role that a man like a Bunny Wailer played in terms of, his own contribution, granted, primarily as a member of the Wailers, but the contribution was significant, and you really can't look at the music and Jamaica's music development without giving those accolades to Bunny Wailer, In
the early years. And then once the Wailers split, what you find happening at that time too was all three men had their own labels. There's Bob Marley with Tough Gang, Peter Tosh with his own, Wailer and Soul. And
well, Wailer and Soul was essentially was the groups. It was the Wailers' personal group label.
And then Bunny Wailer had Solomonic.
Bunny Wailer did Solomonic.
And was right there in retirement.
Marley.
So go down there every day. Well, not really go there every day, but pass by there every day.
Yeah, I was wondering where the hell you do the. I know you like music, but you can't sing a lick. So I'm trying to figure out what the hell.
Life or your one, Richard.
If you know that I never try to sing a tune yet, never. I will talk about the music, but the singing part.
My virgin tell me something I'm talking, I join up.
There you go. But so what we want to do is we want to ease into the, remember now the Wailers had begun to tour, and we want to focus on a couple of those pieces. But before we do that, we're going to run towards a little break, try see if we can put some influence out. And while we're doing the break, I'm going to ask you guys, the listeners out there, to visit the website and sign up. We have a little sign-up sheet there. We have a lot of things that we have in the wings here. You provide you with notices, discounts to products that and programs that we're bringing forward in the thing. So go to the site, sign up. We want to...
and the site is www.yaawdmedia.com.
Yes, let's take a break.
One would wonder, why are you playing Bob Marley? Richie, why are we playing Bob Marley?
Because this was the group at the time. They were working as the Wailers. And they, in fact, this is one of the seminal Wailers album. And Bunny Wailer is one of the one-third contributor to this album. The vocal quality, the content, everything.
And not just singing backup harmony too, but playing percussions.
Absolutely.
Him is a percussion man, especially in the Congo drums.
Absolutely. But important too, the Wailers by now had connected with Chris Blackwell, and they were touring. And Bunny wasn't a man who liked the touring thing. But for Bunny, a tour was you jump on a bus, or you take a car and you go down Ocho Rios or round a Montego Bay. Him never in the Iron Bird thing, right? and I think more importantly too, and Blackwell made this point that although the group, they functioned as members of a group, you know, co-equal members of the group, there was a sort of a combination of respect, but to a certain extent a mistrust, right? And you know what I found amazing is that Blackwell had this perception, but he still sought to try to push the group as Bob Marley and the Wailers. And for somebody like Bunny, that would have created some angst as far as he's concerned, because in the group it was a group of 3 co-equal participants.
And that's why the man is known as Chris Whitewell.
And well, he styled him, both himself and Peter basically styled Blackwell at that point as Whitewell. The other thing too is that traveling overseas on these overseas tours was another challenge for Bunny, because this is a man who's a devout Rasta man. And so, you know, traveling meant working out how he might eat, you know, the kind of food he want and stuff. And then Bob also, well, Blackwell also wanted them to play in front of some audiences that kind of went against
the freaky clubs.
Yeah, the freaky clubs with people that take off them clothes, and as a devout Rastaman, him no in that, you know. And so over time, the angst built, and eventually I think they went to one tour where they were accompanying Johnny Nash, and that tour broke down. They came back to Jamaica thanks to Blackwell give them just under £4,000 so the band could come back. And Bunny wasn't into the touring thing, and I think after they did a second tour to the United States and the UK, and Bunny decided, you know something, that's it, right? And he decided he had a more than a handful of work. He had been building a good little catalog of his own written work, a catalog of songs that a few of which he had started to pinch some time and put on record, and he decided it was time. So 1973 he left the group to pursue his solo career.
Yeah, shortly after the release of Burning.
Burning, right. And which is again one of the significance of asking that we play some tunes off that album. Search for Love was a song that would have been, in fact, that's the song he used to launch his label Solomonic Productions. And then over time, he came out with the seminal album, The Black Heart Man. But let's give a listen to a couple of cuts of the Black Heart Man album. But I would love you to start out with Search for Love, which was what launched his Solomonic Productions label.
That's from the Black Heart Man album, featuring songs like Black Heart Man, Dreamland, Fighting Against Conviction, otherwise known as Battering Sentence, or Sentence, I think a sentence the man I talk about, and Armageddon, otherwise known as Armageddon.
No.
Battering or Fighting Against Conviction was a song written when he was incarcerated for 14 months.
16 months. We don't take after 2.
The man, in an interview, the man said 1 year and 2 months.
16 months him do for
Possession of marijuana.
of weed.
And him say when him got to the embassy, United States Embassy, he found out that it was a wrongful conviction. He was wrongfully convicted under a different name as a different man. And he went to sue the Jamaican government for billions of dollars, but he preferred to write a book about it.
Typical body Wailer. But again, we always say this, God, that you want to know what's going on in Jamaica, you really need to listen to the music. Coffee came on our show a couple weeks ago and made the same argument. You want to know what's going on, because that's what Bonnie was doing. Bonnie, he left the Wailers, started his solo career, and what his approach was to build his reputation around being a roots reggae singer, yes. Right? And in the course of which, though, he would literally push his own conviction as a Rasta man into the music that he was presenting. As we develop the program, we're going to look on, because he did deviate from time to time, to stay with the time that the music was in.
Oh, yes.
But Black Heart Man, without question, I wouldn't consider it as his best album, right? Rock and Groove and whatever album, the Rootsman Skanking to me would have been
the 3 albums.
Yeah. The album that is worthy of the most attention. Rock and Groove follow behind that, and without question.
And then he also did a couple
Black
of singles too that really, really did very well.
But what he certainly did, though, is that between that 1973 to 76 period is literally laid the foundation for roots reggae music. People like a Burning Spear would then follow through on the path that he had created, Culture to a lesser extent, and then a number of other, local artists who coming through as solo performers would follow the same setting.
And he also drew heavily on his work with the Wailers, and redid a lot of the work.
Yes, he revisited, and with certainly he had the right to, because most of those songs he had been involved in penning the songs. But it's important for people to appreciate that he left the Wailers because he felt at the time to. Again, we talked earlier about him not doing a lot of the solo songs during the Wailers, his late period in the Wailers. He always felt that the arrangement, especially when they started to work with Island, that it was marginalizing him, and to a lesser extent marginalized Tasha as well, because Bob was being pushed as the leader of the group, and in fact the marketing was now saying Bob Marley and the Wailers, and he was not particularly keen on that, and so it was on the basis of that he stepped away from the group, but revisited a lot of the music. Dreamland, for example, which they had done earlier, and you played that, the new version of Dreamland that you subsequently played is a adequate demonstration of taking the work and then taking new ownership. Eh?
Yeah.
But both versions of the song can stand up on its own.
1977 did that album Protest.
Right. So let's give another touch of some of the cuts of that Protest album, we're not diminishing. I don't want anybody to feel that we're out there with, by our commentary, we're diminishing any aspect of his work. But certainly there are some records that will always jump out at you, and then there are others who, as a purist, if you're listening in terms of, messaging and tonal quality, voice, etc., everybody listen to the music differently. But let's listen to some more of the Honorable Bunny Wailer.
Time, that was one of the buzzwords too. And you'll also realize that about Bunny Wailer using current slangs or buzzwords in his music.
Yeah, but what is significant about this song too? This is 1980,
yeah.
And if you, as a Jamaican, 1980 was one of the most tumultuous years in the country in terms of that election,
And
PNP,
years leading
JLP
up to
thing,
food shortage,
the big food shortage, police brutality, people can't get no work. I hear him saying in the song, not even liquor flour for make liquor dumpling, because that's how
flour,
things
no rice.
crucial. Yeah, because food shortage was a big. You want a pound of rice in the supermarket, you have to buy some Safex. You have to buy
rice
toilet paper
with women feminine products.
Yeah, and it was, and again we go back to the argument. God, you want to know what's going on in the country, you have to listen to the music, because these guys, we had now taken full ownership of reggae music, and we're not afraid to tell our own stories, and these are the stories. And it is for songs like this kind of cut, that makes Bunny Wailer a seminal part of the music. Let's go to break.
We're going to take a little break, and we're going to revisit Bunny Wailer's albums right after that.
Woo!
Rule Dancehall, 1981 was the year. Where were you? I was still in high school.
1981, them time of my first wife, me a pre, just get that, and she pre me back. I mean, and that was the end of it, party. I remember
we went up,
well, put it this way, we went up to Rayton Manufacturing and we bought a GTR sound system with record changer, CD player, cassette deck, a little power and tuner. And let me tell you, if as a young boy you don't have one of that in your house,
there were various versions of the GTR tuner, but the one to get was the Black Magic.
No, we upgraded eventually to the Black Magic after we put on the ring. But let me tell you something, Bunny Wailer, that's how I bought that album, because we were in Little Premier Plaza, a little record shop around there beside, I think it was Ivan E's store. Family Tree gift shop, and I bought that album, and I bought Bob and the album, Bob and the songbook. But this singer, we remote every tune on this album, because the rock and groove, it was an amazing album. You played a couple cuts off the album, God.
Another Dance.
Another Dance is a Curtis Mayfield tune.
Right, Impressions.
Curtis Mayfield and Impressions, right.
And they played Cool Runnings again at the time too, back again in 1981. Cool Runnings was a big buzzword. Everything was Cool Runnings.
But most importantly, this was Bunny Wailer sinking into the dancehall, what would now become the seminal in terms of Jamaican music, and showing that he was not afraid to adapt to the times, So even as a big roots Rastaman, he was, as a musician, connected to what was the order of the day. And trust me,
Brethren, there were 7 songs on that album, and it's only one of them that it wasn't really on the radio as such. But 6 of those 7 songs was like mad.
Phenomenal. That's why I said we couldn't. We had to stop, because people, you hear these songs and you wanna. It take you back to a point in your life. Remember now, we had just come out of the big election. It was more of a celebratory kind of a mode that was being developed. The country is trying to move into a different direction, and the music is also moving with it as well.
Yes.
So you were getting a more of an uplift, and Bunny Wailer accomplished that with this album.
Dancehall was coming into play. And based on that song, Rule Dancehall.
Let's go back.
Recognize that. And Bunny Wailer did a lot of dub plates for sound systems too, and we're going to touch on some of those that, the generic ones that songs used to use. But he was very, very much and in the dancehall he was known as Father Bunny. But let's touch on Rule Dancehall again, from the top.
Hi there. If you enjoyed that clip, go on over to our website at yawdmedia.com, where you can watch the entire broadcast at your leisure. And while you're there, why don't you check out our other reggae music features? And before you leave, pick up some of our Jamaican reggae merchandise, and hey, don't forget to tell your friends.